The call came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, 3 days before my college graduation ceremony. I remember the exact time because I had just finished ironing my gown and was standing in my apartment kitchen, drinking a glass of water and thinking about how far I had come. Then my phone buzzed on the counter, and I saw it was my mother calling, and something in my chest already knew this was not going to be a normal conversation. She didn't even say hello. "Your brother is going to be in town that weekend," she said. "You know how he gets at these things. All the attention goes to one person and it makes him feel left out. Your father and I talked about it, and we think it's better if we don't come to the graduation. You understand." I stood there in my kitchen with the ironing board still open behind me and my gown hanging on the back of the door, and I didn't say anything for a long moment. I had heard a lot of things from my mother over the years, but this one landed differently. "You're not coming," I said finally. "It wasn't a question. Sweetie, it's just a ceremony, you already did the work. The diploma doesn't care if we're in the seats." I hung up. I didn't cry. I was 31 years old and I had long since run out of tears for the particular brand of disappointment my family specialized in. Let me back up because none of this will make sense without the full picture. My name is Mara. I am the middle child of three, which sounds unremarkable until you understand that in my family, being the middle child meant being the invisible one. My older brother Owen was the golden boy from the moment he was born. Athletic, loud, effortlessly charming in the way that made adults forget you had said anything at all when he walked into a room. My younger sister, Renee, was the baby, which in my mother's world meant perpetual fragility, perpetual protection, perpetual excuses. And then there was me. I was the one who got straight A's and nobody mentioned it at dinner. I was the one who got a full academic scholarship to a university 4 states away, and my father's response was, "Well, that's far." I was the one who worked 2 part-time jobs through undergrad, finished in 3.5 years, went straight into a master's program in healthcare administration, and called home every Sunday even when they didn't pick up. I was the one who sent birthday cards and remembered anniversaries and drove 16 hours round trip one Thanksgiving when my flight got canceled because I didn't want my parents to be alone for the holiday. I was also the one who got told 3 days before my graduate school commencement that my presence was less important than my brother's comfort. Owen was 34 years old. He had never been uncomfortable a day in his life. The history between us was long and specific and exhausting to explain to people who hadn't lived it. Owen had a way of making every major event about himself. My undergraduate graduation, he showed up 40 minutes late and spent the entire reception on his phone, loudly complaining about traffic. My mother spent the dinner telling him how terrible the drive must have been. Nobody asked me what it felt like to have finished college. At Christmas the year I got my first real job after undergrad, salaried, benefits, in a city I loved, Owen announced he'd been laid off and the entire holiday pivoted into a support group for him. My news went unmentioned. At my cousin's wedding, Owen made a toast that somehow lasted 12 minutes and was primarily about himself. My family laughed and said that was just Owen being Owen. The thing about being the invisible child in a family is that you spend a long time convincing yourself it's normal. You tell yourself that families are complicated, that your parents love all their children the same, that you're being sensitive. You build your entire identity around self-sufficiencies because there was never anyone to catch you anyway. You stop asking for things because asking and being denied hurts more than not asking at all. I had been in therapy for 2 years at that point. My therapist, a small sharp woman named Dr. Okafor, had been gently and persistently naming what my family dynamic actually was. The word she used most often was enmeshment. The way my brother's emotional regulation had become the entire family's project. The way my needs had been quietly deprioritized for so long that nobody noticed anymore, including me. She had warned me that milestone events were often flashpoints. She had been right. The morning after my mother's call, I went to my university's graduation office and changed my guest list. I had originally reserved 4 tickets, one for each parent, one for Owen, one for Renee. I now had 4 empty seats. I was standing outside the registrar's office, wondering what I was going to do with them when I ran into Professor Whitmore. Professor Whitmore had been my academic advisor for the last 2 years of my program. She was somewhere in her late 50s, with reading glasses she kept losing and finding on top of her own head, and she had the particular gift of making you feel like the most important person in a room without ever being performative about it. She had written my recommendation letters, talked me through my thesis revisions at 7 in the morning on a Thursday, and once spent an entire office hours helping me figure out how to negotiate my first salary offer without ever making me feel stupid for not knowing how. She noticed something was wrong immediately. "Mara," she said. "What happened?" I told her. I hadn't planned to, but it came out anyway, standing on the sidewalk in front of the registrar's office with my cardigan getting damp from the early morning fog. My family wasn't coming, my mother's exact words, the ironing board still open in my apartment. Professor Whitmore listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said, "Do you have tickets available?" I looked at her. "All four," she said. "If you're willing. I know people who would show up for you." I didn't know what to say to that. Nobody had offered to show up for me in a very long time. I handed her the tickets. She handed them back and said, "Keep one, you'll want to see the faces." 3 days later, I lined up with my cohort in the staging area beneath the auditorium, gown on, hood around my neck, holding my name card. My hands were steady. I had slept surprisingly well. I had made a decision somewhere around 2 in the morning. I was not going to let this ceremony be defined by who wasn't there. I had earned this. My name was on a degree that nobody had given me. I was going to walk across that stage and receive it, and I was going to let that be enough. What I did not know was what Professor Whitmore had done with the other 3 tickets. The ceremony started. Dean's welcome. Land acknowledgement. A student speaker who was funny and genuine and got a real laugh from the audience. The processional took 20 minutes. Our program had over 300 graduates. I found my row, found my seat, tried to locate the section where guests were sitting, and couldn't find a single face I recognized. Then the faculty processional came through. Professor Whitmore was walking with her department colleagues in full regalia, navy gown, gold hood, and as she passed my row, she turned her head and found me in the crowd and gave me one small nod. I didn't know what it meant until they called my name. Mara Ellison. I stood up. I walked to the stage. I climbed the 3 steps, crossed to the dean, shook his hand, received my diploma cover, turned toward the photographer. And from the guest section, in what should have been a politely quiet moment between names, I heard an eruption. Not polite applause. Actual noise. Whooping. The kind of sound that makes heads turn. I looked out into the auditorium and I saw them. Professor Whitmore had given the 3 tickets to my thesis committee. 3 professors, Dr. Reyes, Dr. Nakamura, and Professor Chen, who had read every draft of my work, who had challenged me and pushed me, and told me when something wasn't good enough and told me when something was. They were standing. All 3 of them were standing, in the middle of an auditorium full of seated families, and they were clapping for me like I had done something that mattered. Because I had. I stopped walking for just a second. I don't think anyone else noticed. But I felt something shift inside me on that stage, some old, calcified thing that had been sitting in my chest for most of my adult life, and it cracked, just slightly, and let in some light. I made it to the other side of the stage. I found my seat. I cried quietly for the next 6 minutes, while the rest of the alphabet was called. Now, here is where things get complicated. My mother called that afternoon after the ceremony. She had seen photos. Not because she was there. My roommate had posted a video on Instagram of the moment when my committee stood up, because my roommate was wonderful and also had 17,000 followers. My mother had seen it through Renee, who followed my roommate, who had texted my mother a screenshot. "That looked lovely," my mother said. "We're so proud of you." We, as though she had been there. As though the 4 empty seats hadn't existed. I said thank you and I got off the phone. But here's the things about families like mine. They don't leave well enough alone. Owen called the next day. He had seen the video too. His tone was different from my mother's, flatter, with an edge underneath it that I had learned to recognize over 30 years. "Who were those people standing up for you?" he asked. "My professors," I said. "You had professors come to your graduation instead of your family?" "My family didn't come," I said. There was a pause. "You made us look bad," he said. "I want you to sit with that for a moment." My brother, who had not attended my graduation, who had been the stated reason my parents had not attended my graduation, was calling me to tell me that I had made the family look bad by having people show up for me. I said, "I have to go," and I hung up. 2 weeks after graduation, I started my new position. I had accepted a role as a program director at a regional hospital network. The kind of job I had spent 6 years working toward, the kind of job that came with a real salary and real responsibility and a real office with a window that looked out over a courtyard where people ate lunch. It was, by any reasonable measure, the life I had been building quietly, in the background, while my family's attention went elsewhere. I had also, in the months prior, been doing some accounting of a different kind. During my graduate program, I had taken out a combination of federal loans and a private loan that my parents had co-signed 2 years earlier. They had co-signed, and this is important, not because they were contributing any money, but because the private lender required a co-signer for borrowers without established credit history, and my mother had presented this as an act of great sacrifice. "We're putting our credit on the line for you," she had said more than once in more than one conversation. What she did not say, and what I had come to understand through the painstaking work of actually reading the loan documents, was that the co-signing had been structured in a way that gave my parents notification rights on my account. Not control, but notification. My father had used that to request duplicate statements. I had discovered this 18 months ago when I found a forwarded email in an old account, a bank notification sent to an address I hadn't used in years. The statements had been going to my parents' address the entire time. I do not know exactly what they did with that information. What I do know is that in the year I was completing my graduate program, my mother had made several references to my student loan situation, to extended family members at holiday gatherings, framing it as evidence that I was financially irresponsible. My aunt had quietly mentioned this to me at Easter, not to gossip, but because she was concerned and thought I should know. My mother had been using my loan status, information she received, because my father had quietly requested duplicate statements, to paint me as unstable to family members who didn't know the full picture. The same family members she wanted to be impressed with her, with Owen, with the family's image. The same family members who would be at my grandmother's birthday dinner 3 weeks after my graduation. My grandmother, Nana June, was turning 78. She was sharp and funny, and she had always been, privately, my favorite person in the family. She called me on my actual birthday every year, not the day after, not a Facebook message, but a phone call on the day itself. She had mailed me $20 in a birthday card every year until I was 25, when I told her to please stop because she was retired and on a fixed income, and she had switched to mailing me handwritten letters instead, which I kept in a box in my closet. Nana June had not seen the Instagram video. She did not have Instagram, but she had called me the week after graduation to say she'd heard I'd done something with professors at my ceremony, and she wanted to hear the whole story from me, not from anyone else. I told her. I told her more than I had planned to. I told her about the phone call at 11:47, about the ironing board, about Owen, about the loan statements, about what my aunt had said at Easter. Nana June listened to all of it without interrupting, which she was good at, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Mara, I want you to come to my birthday dinner." I said I had already planned to come. "I want you to bring whatever documents you think I should see," she said. I understood what she was asking. The birthday dinner was held at my aunt and uncle's house, my mother's sister, Aunt Claudette, who hosted most of the family gatherings because she had the biggest dining room table and a husband who genuinely loved to cook. There were 16 people there, my parents, Owen, Renee, Aunt Claudette, and Uncle Raymond, 4 cousins, 2 cousins' spouses, a great-aunt, and Nana June at the head of the table in a yellow cardigan she'd bought specifically for the occasion. My mother had spent the drive there. I knew this because Renee told me later, in one of her moments of guilty candor, telling my father that I had been acting out since graduation, that the Instagram post had been deliberately engineered to embarrass the family, that I had always had a chip on my shoulder. What my mother did not know was that I had arrived 20 minutes early and had a quiet conversation with Nana June in Aunt Claudette's sunroom. Dinner was fine at first, the way these things always are at first. Raymond had made a standing rib roast, and there was good wine, and the cousins' kids were running around in the backyard, and everything looked like a normal family celebration from a certain angle. Then my mother, somewhere between the main course and the cake, brought up my graduation. She did it casually, the way she did everything, slipping it in between other sentences as though it were an afterthought. She said something about how she and my father had been sorry to miss it, but that Owen really had needed them that weekend. She said she hoped I understood. There were polite murmurs around the table, and then Nana June, who had been cutting her roast beef into very precise small pieces and saying nothing for the last 10 minutes, set down her knife. "I've been thinking about something," she said. Her voice was mild and clear. She had a way of speaking in gatherings that made the whole room quiet without raising her volume at all. "I've been thinking about what it must have felt like for Mara to stand up on that stage with none of her family in the seats." My mother started to say something. "I'm not finished," Nana June said, not unkindly, just clearly. She looked at me across the table. Will you tell them what you told me? About the loan statements. I had the folder. I had brought it in my bag as she'd asked, and I had not expected to take it out, had thought maybe this was something Nana June would handle herself in her own way. But she was looking at me like she trusted me to say it myself, which was different. I took out the folder. I explained it calmly. The co-signed loan, the duplicate statements, the fact that notification rights had been used to receive financial information about my account without my knowledge. The fact that this information had then been shared. I looked at my mother when I said this, in conversations with family members in a way that characterized me as financially irresponsible, when the reality was a 31-year-old woman who had put herself through graduate school with federal aid and one private loan that she was repaying on schedule. The table was very quiet. My father was looking at the tablecloth. My mother said, that's not how it happened. We were worried about you. You told Aunt Phyllis at Easter that you were afraid I was drowning in debt, I said. I have a master's degree, a new job, and a loan that's in good standing. I'm not drowning in anything. Owen said something, I honestly don't remember what, something dismissive, something about me always making things dramatic. And Nana June turned to look at him with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Owen, she said, you're going to be quiet right now. He was quiet. Aunt Claudette reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Nana June looked around the table, at her children, her grandchildren, the whole assembled group of us, and she said something I have turned over in my mind many times since that night. She said, I have watched this family for 30 years treat one of its own like a footnote. And I have been too polite to say so out loud, which I now understand was its own kind of harm. She looked at my mother. You didn't go to your daughter's graduation, she said. That's a thing that happened, and there is no version of it that is okay. My mother said nothing. The cake came out a few minutes later. Nana June blew out her candles, made a wish she didn't share, and ate her piece with apparent enjoyment. The room slowly, awkwardly thawed. Cousins went back to talking to each other. Uncle Raymond topped off wine glasses. The children were called in from the backyard. I helped clear plates. Aunt Claudette hugged me in the kitchen for a long time without saying anything, which was exactly right. Later, my mother found me by the coat closet. She said quietly that she didn't appreciate being embarrassed in front of the family. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the ironing board. The phone call at 11:47, the loan statements, the 31 years of Sunday phone calls she didn't pick up. I said, I know, Mom, and I got my coat. The drive home was 2 hours. I put on a playlist I liked and drove through the dark with the windows cracked even though it was a little cold because I needed the air. Somewhere around the 90-minute mark I started to cry, and then I stopped, and then I just drove. I had not fixed anything. I want to be clear about that. My family did not transform that night into something different. My mother did not call me the next morning with an apology that split the sky open. Owen texted me 2 days later with a message that was nominally an olive branch and actually an attempt to relitigate the dinner, and I read it and set my phone face down and left it there for a while. What had happened was smaller and more real than a transformation. What had happened was that the truth had been said out loud in a room full of people who mattered, by someone whose voice carried weight. It didn't undo 30 years. But it meant that 30 years had now been witnessed. That's not nothing. Professor Whitmore emailed me the week after the dinner to ask how the new job was going. I told her it was good. And it was. I told her I'd had a hard family moment but that it had turned out okay. She said she was glad, and she said something I've thought about since, that the people who show up for you become your family too, whether or not they share your blood. I thought about Dr. Reyes and Dr. Nakamura and Professor Chen standing up in the middle of an auditorium. I thought about Nana June in her yellow cardigan saying things out loud that needed saying. I thought about Aunt Claudette's hand over mine and the hug in the kitchen. I have a good life. I built it myself in the background while no one was watching, and now I am watching it, from inside it, every day. My office window faces a courtyard where people eat lunch and sometimes someone brings a dog and everyone in the courtyard stops and looks at the dog for a moment and smiles before going back to whatever they were doing. I eat my lunch there on Tuesdays and Thursdays when the weather allows. Nana June called me last Sunday, right on time the way she always does. We talked for an hour about a book she'd been reading and a trip I've been thinking about taking, and the particular reliable pleasure of things that are quietly good. I didn't bring up the dinner, neither did she. We didn't need to. Some things don't need to be said again once they've been said right the first time.